It's a good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? Bitch boy Mills, my hometown commander, and we are back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list of the commander in front of us on my quest to out-brew your favorite Magic channel. As always, the deck list for the deck in question today will be down in the description below if that's what you want. But if not, let's crack in. Today's kind of an interesting episode because we're doing a commander that's been out for a while, Ginny, Faye, Jetmir second. It's been out since Streets of New Capenna, not a new commander at all. But there was a couple cards both in Wilds of Eldraine and the last couple sets that consistently got my attention, but never made it into my Jetmir Nexus of Rebels deck. Jetmir is a commander we're going to cover in a couple weeks when I talk about the updates that Wilds of Eldraine brought to my Jetmir list. But there was a couple cards that just didn't seem to make that Jetmir list. Jetmir is a deck that cares about tokens, but the difference between a traditional token deck and Jetmir is I've kind of built Jetmir to be a little more aggressive. You get to 9, you start swinging. You're not really trying to generate a wide board more than you need to. You're just trying to get to 9 or get to 10, you know, whatever you need to do in that combat swing and put the damage on the board. What I want to do really quickly before we get into Ginny Faye was talk about a couple of these cards that kind of started in the back of my head of me going, well, where do these cards go? I like these cards. They seem cool. But like, there's gotta be a Jetmir-like deck that you can put these in. And the answer was Ginny Faye, because Ginny Faye is a completely different animal, pun intended, than Jetmir. But I think it's more conducive to these four kind of cards I want to showcase and talk about. Ginny Faye is a 3-mana, 3/3 elf druid. It says, whenever you would create one or more tokens, you may instead create that many 2/2 cat creature tokens with haste or that many 3/1 dog creature tokens with vigilance. And you can see the cat and the dog there in the art. So anytime we make a token, we can instead make that many 2/2 cats with haste or that many 3/1 dogs with vigilance. Well, the first card is 3 Blind Mice. I think this is a card that's getting a lot of love in the current state because of some of the combos that have made with it. Obviously, on the 1, we get our choice. 2 and 3, we get a copy of something we have. 4, everybody gets +1/+1 in vigilance. Okay, well that makes sense, and that card did go into Jetmir. That still made a ton of sense. You're kind of getting that that populate in those middle turns. The +1/+1 in vigilance is good. If you don't have Jetmir's 9, okay, that makes sense. Song of Totentanz. Again, this card made it in Jetmir because we're making tokens. But the difference here is with Ginny Faye, instead of making these rat creature tokens, we're going to make 2/2 cats or 3/1 dogs. Now, they're still going to retain can't block, but everything's going to then get haste. And so whether we take the 2/2 cat or the 3/1 dog, everything's going to get haste, and we're going to be able to use them. So those were the two cards that seemed obvious in Jetmir as well. But the two cards I couldn't find a space for that I think this deck is going to help us hopefully make shine. The first is Farmer Cotton from the Food and Fellowship Recon. This is when it enters the battlefield, you create X/1/1 white halfling creature tokens and X food tokens. Well, the cool part here is we're making 2 different sets of tokens. We can choose between them or keep these or take Ginny Faye. But here's an X white green card that makes us basically double X of tokens. Some 1/1s and then some foods. And I think this is a card that, again, I wouldn't have worked in Jetmir because I would have nothing to do with the food. But bam, here in Ginny Faye, we now have the opportunity to take that and go, okay, here's 2 different sets of tokens that we can make. And the last one is Wildfire Awakener. This is from that Convoke precon. So it has Convoke, so we can tap the other tokens we have if we want to. And the cool part about Convoke is you can tap for a Convoke, a creature that's already come in this turn because it's not tapping on its own accord. It says make X/1/1 red elemental creature tokens with whenever this creature becomes tapped, it deals damage to a target player. The cool part about Ginny's effect is it's just replacing the power and toughness and the type of the tokens getting created, but whichever we choose, the cats or the dogs, will still keep this 1 damage to target player. I wanted to go over those 4 cards because I think that they kind of pushed my mindset coming into this deck. Again, I had Jetmir and I love that deck, and we'll talk about it in a week or two when I do my update series and talk about Jetmir. But I just kind of wanted to show you the difference in a mindset that we're getting with Ginny Faye here. We have this ability that lets us make things instead. So food, clues, treasures. If we want to replace them, we can replace them with creatures. Any other token we might make we can replace with creatures. And I think it brings us into a different brew space. And I just wanted to make sure we talked about that first, because I think for a lot of people that like Ginny Faye, this is the reason you like Ginny Faye. You get to take advantage of these wonky cards that make weird tokens, but you can make them into cats or dogs. Mana base, I tried to get this as efficient as I could while still using some fun things like the Innistrad lands and the Commander lands, check lands. We're still playing the Triumph, although we're not playing any fetch lands. We are still playing some of the mono green ramp that can get forest, so we could still get our Triumph that way. Coming into the enchantments, and I think this is where we play a lot of the reasons to want to play tokens. Beastmaster Ascension can buff our entire board if we attack with enough creatures. Court of Embereth is a pretty fun new card. This is the beginning of your upkeep, create a 3/1 Red Knight creature token. Then if we're the Monarch, it deals X damage to each opponent, where X is the number of creatures we control. I like this because with Ginny Faye, if we're making the right tokens, if we're getting aggressive, well, then we're going to hopefully keep the Monarch and we'll have enough to block. And then every turn, we're going to be making another token and hitting our opponents for some damage. Determined Iteration, this is one of my favorite kind of token-esque type cards from this the Capenna Commander decks. So at the beginning of combat on your turn, we populate, so we choose a token and we make a copy of it, but it has haste and we sacrifice at the beginning and then its end step. Cool part here is we either we take a creature token and we make a copy of it, or we take a random clue or something else we have, make a copy of it, turn it into a cat or a dog, and then it has haste, whichever we choose. So even that 3/1 dog could come in with haste. Feldar Retreat is pretty cool because it gives us a way to either make a landfall trigger into a creature or into a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control. I like this because on a turn where we need a few extra bodies, we can potentially pick that 2/2 and either turn it into a cat with haste or a dog, or leave it as that 2/2 cat. But if we already have a decent board, this is just going to allow us to give a little mini intangible virtue type effect, but that and give another bonus to our creatures. Goblin Bombardment is going to allow us to hopefully turn some extra creature tokens into damage to our opponents, or if we attack and our creatures get chump blocked and our opponent's creatures are going to take out our creatures that are attacking, Goblin Bombardment can still turn that into damage to either snipe out a creature or just deal some damage to somebody's face. Impact Tremors is still one of the best ways as a token deck to help alleviate the pain of having to deal 40 damage to each opponent. Impact Tremors is going to help bring everybody down to size and make it a little bit easier. Again, Ginny eventually will end the game via combat, hopefully, but the hope is maybe Impact Tremors can nail out a little bit more damage, especially when we add it up with something like Rabble Rousing. Rabble Rousing says whenever you attack with one more creatures that make that many 1/1 white citizen creature tokens, then if we control 10 or more creatures, you can play the card that we hit away. But the great part about Rabble Rousing is every turn when we attack, we're getting more tokens. Now with Ginny Faye, we can make those something else if we want to, otherwise they come down as 1/1 citizens. But this plus Impact Tremors means we attack, we make that many tokens to deal that much damage to our opponents. So you can see that these little mini sub-synergies and these token decks are starting to kind of come together. Intangible Virtue, all of our creature tokens get +1/+1 in Vigilance. Now we can basically, hopefully, attack for free and kind of block anything that could be coming back. Mirari's Wake, one of my single favorite green-white enchantments. Gives a flat buff to all of our creatures, but also doubles the amount of mana when we tap our lands, and that's going to be really helpful for us to take advantage of these X spells that make tokens, or just get more creatures down if need be. Parallel Lives just got that great reprint in Enchanting Tales, which was another card that kind of made me want to start playing around making some more token decks on the channel. So it actually has eclipsed below Anointing Procession on cost for the deck. Obviously, you still have Anointed Procession, you still have Primal Vigor if you want, you still have Doubling Season, but thankfully Parallel Lives has kind of climbed down on that scale of price and availability. Prosperous Partnership, a card that looks good on its face, but once you play with this in-game, this card is really cool. So when it comes in, you get 2/2 citizen creature, 2/1/1 citizen creature tokens, but it says you could tap 3 untapped creatures you control to make a treasure. The great part about Prosperous Partnership is if you have Vigilance on your creatures, you attack, right? And obviously you don't tap because you're a Vigilance, right? And that last opponent's turn before your turn, if your creatures are all still up, you tap them down with Prosperous Partnership, either net the treasure, or with Ginny Faye, we could net creatures if we want to. Untap, and then we either have extra mana or we have extra creatures to hurt our opponents with. Roar Resistance, giving all of our creature tokens haste. And whenever they attack, we can pay 2. If we do, we can give them +2/+0, or if one of our opponents is attacking, at least one of our opponents, we can give their creatures +2/+0, which is kind of sneaky. Shared Animosity, which is probably one of the reasons to play a token stack and go wide. Buff our creatures up +1/+0 for each attacking creature that shares a type with it. All we need is a single trample enabler if that's the route we want to go. I had really considered throwing Garrick's Uprising in here for a little bit of trample, but the problem was I didn't know how much we'd be drawing off of things because we don't have that many creatures with power 4 or greater. I didn't know how much we'd be drawing. I didn't know if it'd be worth it, but I think maybe pretty quickly would put something like Garrick's Uprising back in to have a trample enabler. The trample enablers we do have, we'll talk about, but I wasn't sure. The problem sometimes when you're making a list for the first time, right, is that you don't have the testing knowledge to know what you need when. But I think we have enough enablers here for a trample on a big alpha attack to take up people out. As far as artifacts, Arcane Signet, Chromatic Lantern, Soul Ring for mana rocks. We actually get to play Bootlegger Stash. And this is pretty cool because Bootlegger Stash is going to do 2 things for us. It could just make us treasures, and we're playing things to double the amount of tokens we make, so we could potentially get twice the amount of mana out of our lands that way. Or, if we have extra lands, we could potentially just turn them into creatures with Genie Phase effect. I like Bootlegger Stash. It's not a cheap artifact, but if there's any place to play it, I think it's here. Halo Fountain, I think, is one of the best cards from Streets of New Capenna for this deck, maybe besides Rabble Rousing, and just what it can do. Obviously, besides Jinnie and Jetmir, obviously, besides those 2. I like Halo Fountain a lot. The cool part is we're untapping tap creatures to get these effects. So let's say we attacked with a creature, we can untap 1 to get a 1/1 token, untap 2 to draw a card, and untap 15 to win the game. So as you can see, there's a scaling effect. We can hopefully get a lot of good out of this. And again, untapping a creature that didn't have vigilance to make another token. Again, it makes us a 1/1 citizen, but if Genie Phase out, we get that cat or that dog. Again, we're just taking advantage of it. Horn of Valhalla on the sorcery side is another X spell that can make us tokens. We've already talked about how great X spells that make us tokens are for Ginny Faye with her replacements, but then it gives us an equipment that a quick creature gets +1/+1 for each creature we control. So we can pick something pretty big, get something pretty big, make it hard to deal with. One of the trample enablers we have is Scepter Celebration. This is a card I've fallen in love with in Jetmir, and I think it feels really good here. Quick creature gets +2/+0 in trample. You can put this on anything, whether it be some of our creatures we'll talk about that are going to get kind of big, or just a token. And whenever it deals damage to a player, we create that many 1/1 citizen creature tokens. Again, with Ginny Phase replacement, those can be 2/2s or 3/1s. Getting into the spells, Beast Within, Generous Gift, and Swords of Plowshares for some removal. Big score for a little bit of card draw. I like this here because we're drawing the cards and we're making treasures, which again, we can keep as treasures or turn into those creatures. Cabaretti Charm, another good way to give trample to our board. Creatures I control get +1/+1 and trample until end of turn. It can also deal damage equal to the number of creatures we control to a target creature or planeswalker, or it can just make us 2 tokens. I like Cabaretti Charm. It's kind of a jack of all trades kind of card. Call the Coppercoats, another way for us to make tokens. Choosing any number of target opponents, we create X 1/1 human soldier creature tokens, where X is the number of creatures they control. So we pay 3 for one opponent, 2 extra for another opponent, 7 total for all 3 of our opponents. Again, it's at instant speed. We can do it on our opponent's turn. They can become blockers. Again, if Ginny Phase down, I'm going to become a Broken Record. They can become cats or dogs. Flawless Maneuver, and Grand Crescendo here for some protection of our creatures, giving them indestructible. What's cool about Grand Crescendo is it has an X attached to it, so we can actually make citizen and creature tokens before we get all of our things indestructible, and that's pretty cool too. March of the Multitudes, making tokens, but this one has Convoke, so we can tap the creatures we already have to help make some more. One of my favorite plays with March of the Multitudes, if you're planning on doing it at instant speed, wait till that opponent's turn. Right before it's your turn, we're kind of like with Proster's Partnership. We had those creatures up and we weren't doing anything with them. Tap them for March of the Multitudes, put new creatures down, and then they could attack on your turn, and then secure the wastes, just making X 1/1 tokens that, again, with Ginny Faye, we could hopefully replace if we want, or keep them as just 1/1 tokens. There's plenty of options. I like that we have our choice as opposed to being stuck with the original 1/1 that's printed on the spell. Cultivate, Farseek, Kadama's Reach, Nature's Lore, Ramp, and Growth, 3 visits for Ramp. We want good Ramp. We want to make sure we get our colors out. And because we're in a deck that has a lot of, mix of colors, we want to make sure we get them. 3 visits and Nature's Lore can both target our Tri-Land. Same thing with Farseek. So we have 3 different Ramp spells that can target our Tri-Lands. Sorry, our Tri-Land in Jetmir's Garden. Cultivate, Kadama's Reach, and Rampant Growth both all go get a basic land. But the cool part is we get to play many partings, which is search your library for a basic land, put it into your hand, and then you create a food. So again, with Ginny Faye out, we can get a cat, we can get a dog instead of that food. So you'd see we're adding on extra value to a 1 mana spell that most people wouldn't play. These are the kind of spells I hope we can find and take good advantage of in our list. Aganjo Uprising, a spell that I have a lot of love for in its time in Jetmir, feels really good here, making samurai creature tokens with vigilance. They gain menace and haste until end of turn, and then our opponent creates X-1. Each opponent makes X-1, 2/2 samurais. Again, if we have if we have our Parallel Lives out, if you're playing this in a deck that has more token doublers, you'll one-up your opponents pretty quickly. And if you choose to make the 3/1 dogs, they'll keep that vigilance, menace, and haste as well. So you can kind of play around with what you want. Indulge is a really fun card. Whenever the regular sorcery says whenever a creature attacks this turn, make a 1/1 white citizen creature token that's tapped and attacking. So this is kind of like rabble rousing, but the difference is it's tapped and attacking. So here we kind of want to make those dogs because they're going to come in as 3/1s instead of 1/1s, plus whatever other buffs we have. And then excess on the backside for the Aftermath says create a treasure token for each creature you control that dealt combat damage to a player this turn. So if we indulge, make a big attack, get a bunch of tokens off the attack, we can actually excess for those tokens we made that dealt damage and bring them back in and get treasures back or get more creatures back with Ginny Faye. We talked about Song of Totem Towns, and then the Battle of Bywater. Destroy all creatures of power 3 or greater, then create a food for each creature you control. I like this for 2 reasons. One, if we have this card in our hand, we can only, maybe we focus on just making cats with Ginny Faye as 2/2s. That way, if we have our effects like a tangible virtue out, that only makes them 3/3s. Or worst case scenario, we lose the dogs with the spell, but we're hopefully going to take out all of our opponent's creatures, leave all of our good creatures alive, and then make a food for each creature we already control. Oh, well, if Ginny Faye's out, now we're making 2/2 cats with haste for every creature we already control, and now we might have potentially doubled the amount of creatures we have when maybe even everyone else lost creatures that they had. I really like this card in this deck. Again, not a good Jetmir card because it's not what Jetmir's trying to do, but I think in Ginny Faye, this card feels really good, and here's another perfect example of a card that I love in this deck that maybe wouldn't have seen play in another deck. And then White Sun's Twilight. We gain X life, make X/1/1 might creature tokens with Toxic 1, and if it's 5 or more, destroy all other creatures. There's 2 ways you can look at White Sun's Twilight. At 4, it makes you 4 2/2s for 6 mana. They have Toxic 1 and they can't block. If it's 5 or more, it's basically just like Martial Coup. It's a board wipe. The tokens stay around. But again, if we have a ton of mana, just dump it into this, wipe the board, get a bunch of these 2/2s, maybe with Toxic 1, and we could potentially poison somebody out or just hurt somebody in the process. So again, we're trying to play board wipes that either advantage us or just give us an advantage for playing them. Before we get into the creatures, we'll talk about the one Planeswalker we are playing, and that's Xenagos the Reveler. I like Xenagos the Reveler because it's going to help us with this X-Spell token creation game plan. First ability says add X mana in a combination of red or green, where X is the number of creatures you control. Well, bam, we already kind of want to go wide. We're going to be making a bunch of creature tokens with the things that we're replacing, so that could help, or it could allow us to go big into another spell. The 0 just makes us a satyr creature token with haste, and then the -6 says exile the top 7 cards of your library, put in a number of creatures or lands, throwing them onto the battlefield. More often than not, with Xenagos, we're going to be either +1ing, netting a ton of mana, or hitting the 0 button and getting a token. Almost always with Xenagos Reveler, I'm +ing 1 and I'm getting mana. All right, well, let's talk about those small section of creatures we do have. Again, we can still take advantage of creatures. It's not like just because we care about tokens that we can't play real creatures. And again, I'm going to come back, I'm going to be a broken record. We're playing creatures that are going to mean a lot in Ginny Faye because of what we can take advantage of. First off, Academy Manufacturer. So Academy Manufacturer says if we would create a clue, food, or treasure token, instead we make one of each. The way this ability would work with Ginny Faye is we would have our choice. We can have Ginny Faye go off first, or replacement go first, or Academy Manufacturers. More often than not, we're going to choose Academy first to try to make one of all three. And Ginny would make our choice of each of those individual ones, getting either a cat or a dog. So we could turn any one of those three that we're already kind of making and maybe don't want into 3 creatures instead of 1. Adeline, a big creature in her own right, gonna hit hard in combat, but again, every time we attack for each opponent, we make a 1/1 tapped and attacking that player. Again, with Ginny Faye out, we can make that into a 2/2 or a 3/1. That could be our choice. Champion of Lambhole, another one of our ways to potentially end the game. Creatures with power less than it can't block creatures we control, and whenever another creature comes in, we put a counter on it. As soon as we get Champion Lambhole big enough, our opponents are not going to be able to block us, and we will end the game. Champion Lambhole is great for that, being only 3 mana. Devilish Valet, a fun card that, depending on how big of a turn we have, Devilish Valet could just threaten to take out a person outright. It has Trample and Haste. It's a 1/3. And it says whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, double Devilish Valet's power until end of turn. All we need to do is make 8 or 9 tokens, or have 8 or 9 creatures come in one turn, and Devilish Valet can snipe one person out in one turn. It has Trample. The only defense we're going to have to Devilish Valet is going to be someone having first strike. Other than that, we are going to trample through, and we're going to hit someone for a ton of damage, hopefully. Hopefully my goal with Devilish Valet in this deck is to be that thing to help take people out. You know, you could make a ton of tokens with haste, swing at one person, swing Devilish Valet at somebody else, and maybe you could take 2 people out in the same combat. We talked about Farmer Cotton. Goblin Rabble Master, just making a gobbo every turn with haste, and then all other goblins have to attack. But again, I like Goblin Rabble Masters making a token every turn. We can either leave it a goblin, because then those goblins will buff Rabble Master up, or we turn it into something else and use it obviously for that skill. Jaheira, letting all of our tokens tap for a green, so even if we get stuck with food, they can still tap for a green, or any of the creature tokens we make can tap for a green. This again will help us in the X spells, or just help us in getting more things on the battlefield. Tapping for creature tokens, tapping for green is perfect for all the anything, or the anything mana costs, or the generic mana costs for our spells, getting them out, getting them on board, and making sure that we're committing enough each turn. Jetmir, of course, the commander I've referenced multiple times, and he's a great finisher for the deck. The way his ability works is when we have 3 or more creatures, all of our creatures get +1/+0 in Vigilance. When we have 6 or more, they also get +1/+0 in Trample. And if we have 9 or more, all of our creatures get +1/+0 and Double Strike. Jetmir coming down is effectively as good as a Craterhoof Behemoth in the right scenarios, because you're giving all your creatures Trample and Double Strike, and it's going to get very tough for your opponents to block. Because remember, Double Strike giving you First Strike and Normal Strike damage, even on a 5/1 token, is 10 damage, and 5 of that is going to be First Strike on whatever's blocking it. I love Jetmir, although it's not the goal of the deck here, of course, to take advantage of Jetmir's ability. It will be one of the finishers, just like Cabaretti Charm, giving our things Trample, that we can use to hopefully push out one of our opponents. King Darien giving all other creatures +1/+1, but we can sacrifice it to give all of our tokens Hexproof and Indestructible on a turn. This is great because then we can protect our tokens in combat or against a board wipe. Yes, we would give up all of our regular creatures, but I think that's okay to keep our tokens and keep ourselves alive and potentially ready to hit somebody back. Legion Warboss, very similar to Goblin Rabble, where it makes a goblin every turn. But it has Mentor, so if it attacks, we can put a counter on a creature with lesser power. So I like Legion Warboss. Again, it makes the Gobbo every turn, so we're always going to get a Ginny Faye trigger every turn to do that. But it also could just help us buff up our smaller creatures. Nayali giving all of our attacking tokens Double Strike is going to be really good. It's going to make them hit even harder, even if we don't have something like Trample or Jetmir out. The only downside to Nayali says whenever one or more tokens we control attack a player, exile the top card of our library. And during a turn we attack with a token, we can play a card. So if our tokens attack 3 players, we're going to exile 3 cards no matter what. And we can hopefully play those cards from exile, but it could potentially get us in a bad position if we exile things we didn't necessarily want to exile. I know that sounds like a dumb downside, but it's something to keep in the back of your mind when you're playing with these effects. What risk do I have to give up? Peregrine Took says whenever we would make one or more tokens, those tokens plus an additional food are created instead. We can sack 3 foods to draw a card. Peregrine Took I see as, again, just like a canning manufacturer, we let this go off before Ginny Faye, and then Ginny Faye can turn that extra food into something else, or we can just assemble the foods and draw a card off Peregrine Took if we wanted to. Pollen Shield Hair, the adventure giving something +1, +X in vigilance on the turn where X is the number of creatures we control, and then just giving all of our tokens a flat +1/+1. Pollen Shield Hair is not the greatest thing in the world. I think this could definitely be taken out for something else. But again, I wanted to show the new Wilds of Eldraine's cards. And if you don't like Pollen Shield Hair, take it out. Throw in another buff enchantment. Throw in another card that makes tokens. Again, this is where the version 1.0 of the deck list comes and matters, is we're trying things out. Queen Alanol, another great example of this effect that we make an extra soldier, so we can put this off before Ginny Faye to get an extra token, but its power toughness is equal to the number of creatures we control, so it's just going to become big. It, just like Regal Bunnycorn, are going to be these creatures that don't cost us a ton of mana to get down, and are going to get bigger and bigger the more we stack our board, and are going to become harder and harder for our opponents to deal with. These are the things we want to put trample on. These are the perfect targets for Scepter of Celebration. Get them on these guys, get them in swinging and attacking, and then have them hit our opponents. A really fun interaction with these guys in that Scepter is if you gave them double strike, on that first strike, if they had trample, they would deal damage to our opponent with Scepter of Celebration, make tokens, then they would be bigger on normal strike damage when they trample through again. So that's just a fun interaction if you can manage to get them at the same time. Regal Caracal gives all the cats we could create +1/+1 in lifelink, but when it comes in, we get 2 more cats. This just feels like, again, it could come in, we can choose the 2/2s instead of the 1/1s, but if we see this card early, then we can just keep taking the cats with Ginny Faye, and then we know when Regal Caracal comes down that we're giving them lifelink as well, which again will keep us alive, it'll keep us in the fight. Rocco Street Chef is a commander in its own right. I have both loved and hate playing against my friend Andrew's Rocco deck. It's a good time, but it feels perfect in this deck. At the beginning of each our end step, each player exiles the top card of their deck, and until our next end step, each player can play those cards. But whenever a player plays a land from exile or casts a buff from exile, we get a 1/1 counter on target creature and create a food. So we get to not only buff our creatures, but again, get another Ginny Faye trigger where we can take advantage of that token. Rosie Cotton of South Lane, who works very well with Rocco, it says when it enters the battlefield, we make a food, so we automatically get our choice of a token there with Ginny if we want to. It says whenever we create a token, we put a counter on target creature you control other than Rosie. So again, Rosie can start buffing up other creatures as well. I like it, and again, just by herself with Ginny Faye, she's going to be netting us value. Tireless Provisioner, whenever a land comes in, we get a food or a treasure. Again, we can either keep either of those, or again, with Ginny Faye, replace it with our choice of a token. And then Witty Rope Master, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's kind of another copy of this Impact Tremor style effect. Well, tell me, what do you guys think of Ginny Faye? I hope you see the through line. I hope you see the understanding of why I wanted to cover Ginny Faye. It's a deck that I think could be really fun, and I want to try it. I want to see what I think of it, because I absolutely adore my Jetmir deck. It's a ton of fun to play. It's one of my favorite decks I think I've ever built. But the problem is it does one thing well, and that's laser beaming the table down. And sometimes when you want to stick it out a little bit, have a little bit more fun, Jetmir isn't necessarily the deck for that, because it's trying to hit people down quickly. It's trying to end the game quickly. I look at Jetmir and realize it was a deck a lot like Winota that I built before, that's trying to end the game quickly, and trying to take advantage of the advantage that you get with Jetmir's ability. Whereas I think this Ginny Faye deck, what it's going to do is go a little bit wider, have a little bit more fun. And so I think I'm going to test it and see if maybe it's something I can either build alongside Jetmir, or just keep around and maybe, and have to play as well if I want to. But let me know what you think of Ginny Faye down in the comments, and I will catch you guys next time.